After issuing an instruction for his Dao warriors to begin collecting the nearby spirit plants, Han Li remained still on the spot as he made a hand seal, and the azure sword array that he had conjured up immediately flew toward another nearby section of the medicine garden. Countless streaks of azure sword chi came raining down upon the restriction, breaking through it with ease, and some of the Dao warriors immediately flocked over to that area to collect all of the spirit plants there. Right at this moment, all of the destroyed restrictions began to slowly re-emerge, indicating that they were capable of self-regeneration, just like the starry light barrier that encompassed the entire garden. Han Li was very impressed upon seeing this. The fact that these restrictions were still functional after so many years was already quite astonishing. And the fact that they were capable of self-regeneration indicated that whoever had set up the restrictions had to have been an extraordinary master in arrays. With that in mind, Han Li was even more curious about who this infernal frost immortal lord was. Han Li's trio wasn't holding back in the slightest, and it didn't take them long to clear out the entire outskirts of the medicine garden. However, Han Li was naturally far more efficient than Patriarch Cold Flame and Lu Yuqing, thanks to his sword array and his army of Dao warriors. So the majority of the claimed spirit plants had fallen in his possession. During this time, he had even helped Lu Yuqing break several restrictions, much to the envy and dismay of Patriarch Cold Flame. As the three of them progressed deeper into the garden, they discovered that the sections here were far larger in area than the ones before. And the restrictions were also brighter, making it impossible to see the spirit plants within from the outside. Han Li swept his gaze around the area to ensure that there weren't any abnormalities, then immediately unleashed his sword array to attack a glowing red restriction. Patriarch Cold Flame and Lu Yuqing also each chose a restriction of their own to attack. But this time, the sword array formed by the azure bamboo cloudswarm swords wasn't able to inflict much damage onto the red restriction beneath it. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he switched to a different hand seal, upon which the azure sword array abruptly converged toward the center to form a giant azure sword lotus flower. He then began to chant an incantation, and the sword lotus flower gradually bloomed, while arcs of dazzling lightning flashed over all of its petals as it swooped down toward the red light barrier. Every single one of the lotus flower's petals latched tightly onto the red light barrier before revolving forcefully to tear into the restriction, and the red light barrier instantly began to warp violently. This time, it was only able to withstand the assault for a short while before it exploded into countless specks of red light with a resounding boom. Han Li was ecstatic to see this, but his expression then instantly stiffened as he caught sight of a yellowish-brown spirit tree up ahead. Its trunk was very coarse and riddled with deep cracks, but it was giving off a vibrant sense of vitality, clearly indicating that it was no ordinary tree. However, the tree had been severed down the middle, and only a section of the trunk still remained. The cut was still quite fresh, and there were droplets of yellow sap oozing out. Han Li made his way over to the tree trunk with a contemplative look on his face. Patriarch Cold Flame and Lu Yuqing were just about to go to work on some other restrictions, but all of them also stopped what they were doing and approached Han Li upon seeing this. "It looks like someone got here before us. Judging from how fresh the cut looks, they shouldn't have been here any longer than a day ago," Patriarch Cold Flame surmised. Han Li nodded in response, then took a glance up at the starry light barrier overhead. It was no wonder that they had broken the restriction so easily, considering it had already been broken recently once before. The restriction was capable of self-regeneration, but too little time had passed for it to make a full recovery, and that was the only reason why they had been able to bypass it with so little trouble. "Who could it be? Xianxia?" Lu Yuqing murmured. "No. Xianxia did get to the Light Frost Palace a little earlier than us, but there clearly wasn't enough time for him to get here and break this restriction," Han Li replied with a shake of his head. "In that case, who could it be?" Lu Yuqing asked. "I don't know, but that person didn't touch any of the spirit plants prior to this. I don't know if those spirit plants failed to catch their eye, or if they simply didn't have enough time, but given that there are no signs of battle here, I'm assuming it was most likely the former. That leads me to believe that it was most likely a Golden Immortal Stage Senior who passed through here before us, Han Li speculated. There were many Golden Immortals who had entered the infernal Frost Immortal Manor on this occasion, and he couldn't tell exactly which one was responsible for this. Patriarch Coldflame and Lu Yuqing exchanged a glance upon hearing this, then discussed the matter a little longer, before parting ways to continue to work on other restrictions. Meanwhile, Han Li continued to observe the severed tree trunk in front of him, and he gently dipped his finger in some of its yellow sap before taking a sniff, upon which he was immediately struck by a sense of reinvigoration. His eyes instantly lit up as he swept a sleeve through the air to release a streak of azure light, which enveloped the tree trunk before uprooting the entire thing along with the spirit soil around it. He didn't know what this tree was, but the fact that it had caught a Golden Immortal's eye indicated that it was definitely a very precious spirit tree. Even though the tree had been chopped down, there was still a chance for Han Li to revive it using his heaven-controlling vial. After doing all of that, Han Li flew over to another section of the medicine garden before making a hand seal, and the sword lotus flower up above instantly swooped down to encompass the bright blue light barrier down below. The thick petals of the lotus flower then began to slice against the light barrier, causing a massive commotion, and it didn't take long before the blue light barrier was destroyed to reveal what was underneath. Han Li's expression immediately darkened slightly at the sight that was laid out before him. The spirit plants in this section had already been taken as well, and this time, not even the roots had been left behind. Han Li remained still on the spot for a moment before flying over to another section, and around 15 minutes later, yet another restriction was broken under the might of the azure sword lotus flower. Once again, whatever was in this section had already been taken, and there was a hole that was several feet deep in the ground. He shook his head as he withdrew his gaze. At this point, most of the restrictions deep in the medicine garden had already been broken. Of course, Han Li was the one who had done most of the work, and all of the spirit plants here had already been taken, with no exceptions. Some of them still had their roots remaining, and Patriarch Coldflame and Lu Yuqing had no interest in such things, but Han Li picked up every single root that he encountered. At this moment, Patriarch Coldflame and Lu Yuqing were still each working on a restriction. And Han Li took a glance at the two of them before withdrawing his gaze and turning his attention to the innermost part of the medicine garden. There was a plot of land there that was over 1,000 feet in size, so it was far more massive than all of the other sections. The entire section was enshrouded under a thick purple light barrier with arcs of purple lightning flashing over its surface, and it was giving off a formidable aura, almost as if it were a massive purple beast that was laying dormant on the ground. This section was clearly different from all of the other sections, so the trio decided to leave it for last. Han Li turned his gaze toward the purple light barrier, and he was just about to call upon his azure sword lotus flower when a resounding boom rang out nearby. As it turned out, Lu Yuqing had just broken a restriction. This restriction was more formidable than all of the prior ones, and her complexion was a little pale, indicating that she had severely taxed herself to break it. She quickly summoned a pill before swallowing it while casting her gaze forward, upon which a disappointed look appeared on her face. Whatever had been here had already been taken, with even the roots being taken, and there were only 2 huge holes left in the ground. However, whoever had come here seemed to have passed through in quite a hurry, as evidenced by the fact that there were still some thin pieces of roots left behind. Lu Yuqing pouted with dismay, and she was just about to turn and depart when Han Li approached her as he said, "These appear to be the roots of some type of spirit bamboo. Bamboo is different from other plants in that it can sprout even from root fragments given the proper care, and the newly grown bamboo should be quite valuable, so it would be a waste for you to leave these roots behind." An elated look appeared on Lu Yuqing's face upon hearing this, and she asked, "Do you recognize this spirit bamboo, Brother Han?" Han Li shook his head in response. "I don't, but these silver roots seem quite remarkable, so the spirit bamboo that they belong to must be very precious. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been planted so deep in the medicine garden. If you can find someone who can identify these roots, you should be able to sell them for a good price." Lu Yuqing nodded eagerly in response as she swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of azure light, which carefully dug out the silver roots in the 2 holes before storing them into a pair of jade boxes. She stowed one of the jade boxes away, then handed the other to Han Li as she said, "Thank you for your guidance, Brother Han. Otherwise, I would have passed up this entirely." Han Li made no effort to refuse and accepted the jade box as he really was quite interested in these silver spirit bamboo roots. Meanwhile, a burst of rumbling was coming from another direction, and Patriarch Coldflame was in the process of attacking a light blue restriction with a set of 12 flying dagger spirit treasures, all of which were spirit treasures of a very high caliber. However, this was yet another starry light barrier, and it was extremely resilient. Patriarch Coldflame had already been attacking the light barrier for quite some time, but it was displaying no signs of breaking at all. A slightly agitated look appeared on his face as he took a glance at Han Li, and after a brief moment of contemplation, he stopped what he was doing before flying toward Han Li. Han Li was examining the silver roots in his jade box when he noticed Patriarch Coldflame coming toward him, and he promptly stowed the jade box away. "Fellow Taoist Han, that restriction over there is rather difficult to deal with. Would you be able to give me a hand with it?" Patriarch Coldflame asked as he cupped his fist in a salute. "Of course, fellow Taoist Coldflame. Let's go have a look together, fellow Taoist Lu," Han Li replied with a faint smile. "Thank you, fellow Taoist Han," Patriarch Coldflame immediately said with an elated expression. Before long, the 3 of them arrived at the starry light barrier, and Han Li began to examine it. He had actually already noticed this restriction earlier, but he could tell that it was quite a formidable restriction, so he had decided to save it for later. However, it seemed that Patriarch Coldflame had gotten to it first.